My Lords, it's quite daunting to follow Noble Baroness Meacher, and I hope very much indeed she won't be driven to write a book on this matter, though if she would, maybe we could see some change. Rise to speak to Amendment 65 in the name of Baroness Stroud and with the support of Noble Baronesses Baroness Lister, Ludford and Prashar, which, as discussed, aims to introduce, quite rightly, the right to work for asylum seekers who have been in the UK for more than 6 months. My noble friend the Minister will know the gist of my argument from my comments on Tuesday, and I'm very grateful for her forbearance on that night. Suffice to say that I believe this amendment to be a matter of complete common sense and exactly the sort of policy that should underpin global Britain's new immigration system. My Lords, this is a moment when we have to decide who we are as a nation. We want to have an immigration system that takes back control, and where British people can see that we are actually trying to manage our borders, that we are actually managing our borders, but also that we have the compassion to those in need when we have so much already as a nation. My Lords, this isn't a niche opinion. I'd like to note the support on this issue from all wings of the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats and other crossbenchers who support the extension of the right to work for asylum seekers, including, I believe, the Deputy Prime Minister. My Lords, the arguments for this right to work are overwhelming, but let me please just restate a couple of them, and hopefully it is helpful to hear them from these benches. As the Noble Lord Alton said earlier, the latest figures show that 125,000 people are waiting for asylum decisions. Every study shows that the net benefit to the state would be in the tens or even hundreds of millions of pounds a year in increased tax take if this measure was enacted. The UK economy is recovering after COVID, and a lot of jobs have been created, but this has in turn created labour shortages. It makes no sense whatsoever that asylum seekers who can drive HGVs or serve in the NHS are forced to sit around doing nothing for over a year while they wait a decision from the Home Office. And the Noble Baroness Chakrabarti made that point very powerfully. Secondly, on integration, there is very persuasive evidence that the right to work has a large positive impact on the integration of asylum seekers who successfully settle. As other noble lords have already mentioned, the Government's Migration Advisory Committee recently underlined that shorter waiting times have a large positive impact on long-term employment outcomes for asylum seekers. And these are measures, as noble lords have noted, that have overwhelming popular support with the public. And if I can mention one niche statistic, 73% of red wall voters support the right to work, according to recent polling. And as others have mentioned, business leaders back the easing of the ban on the right to work. My Lords, there is a basic human dignity argument for this policy. I believe that every individual should be able to support themselves and their families. In fact, I'd go further and say that as Conservatives, we believe that every family has a personal responsibility to do so where they can. I've often made the argument that work is the best route out of poverty. So the aim and intention of this amendment is to do precisely that. Let people support themselves and create their own pathway from poverty to prosperity whilst they wait for the decision. The lack of the right to work leaves people vulnerable to exploitation, declining mental health, poverty, and modern slavery. But if the human dignity arguments don't seal the deal, this amendment could also be viewed as purely pragmatic. Reforms to the asylum system proposed through the Nationality and Borders Act will take time to come fully into effect. In the interim, whilst asylum cases are being processed, the asylum system continues to be under considerable strain. By offering asylum seekers the right to work, the government would take pressure off themselves. Now, I anticipate that the Minister and other colleagues might be inclined to respond to this amendment using the pull factors argument, and I know others have addressed it. But let me please address those points from these benches. Firstly, it's push factors like war and famine that drive refugees to these shores, not pull factors. If there are any pull factors, it's those that encourage people to come to the UK. It's our language, it's our culture, it's our rule of law, it's our democracy, it's our historic ties through the Commonwealth. It's family connections, it's liberty that attracts people to this country, not the welfare payments. It's worth noting that the UK is currently an outlier in enforcing a 12-month wait period for work and then placing long restrictions on which employment can be taken up. No other nation, whether across Europe, USA, Australia or Canada, has such stringent requirements. So it's worth asking why they have not considered the right to work to be such a pull factor. This view is totally backed by the experts. The Migration Advisory Committee underlined that there's no evidence in academic research that people decide to claim asylum based on these kinds of factors. And the Home Office commissioned a study, which others have mentioned, that also shows that there is little evidence for this. All of this is to say that I believe the government could quite legitimately, and without nervousness, and in line with its poverty strategy of families working their way out of poverty, adopt this amendment that allows asylum seekers to work after 6 months of being in the UK.
My Lords, we've heard 8 speakers on one side of this debate, and I think a word is perhaps in order from the other side. In a sense, we're back to the same point, which is this.